The golden rays of the early morning sun slowly crept through the heavy curtains of Windsor Castle. Prince William stirred in his bed as the gentle light touched his face. Today was not just any ordinary day. Today his father would become King of England, and William knew that millions of people around the world would be watching every single moment. He quietly got out of bed, trying not to wake Kate, who was still sleeping peacefully beside him. But as he moved towards the window, Kate opened her eyes and smiled at him. She had been awake for the past hour, thinking about everything that needed to be perfect today. Down the hall, their 3 children were already stirring. Prince George, who was now 10 years old, had been excited about this day for weeks. He understood better than his younger siblings how important today would be. He had been practicing his formal walk and learning about royal protocol from his tutors. Princess Charlotte, aged 8, was equally excited, but in a different way. She loved the idea of wearing her special dress and seeing all the beautiful decorations. She had been asking her mother endless questions about what would happen and who would be there. Little Prince Louis, at 5 years old, was the most excited of all, even though he did not fully understand why everyone was making such a big fuss. All he knew was that Grandpa was getting a very special crown, and there would be lots of people and probably cake afterwards. Kate got up and put on her silk robe. She walked down the corridor to check on the children. She found George already awake and sitting on his bed, looking out the window at the gardens below. He turned to her with a serious expression on his young face. "Mama, do you think I will do everything right today?" he asked her quietly. Kate sat down beside him and wrapped her arms around her eldest son. "You will be perfect, my darling," she told him softly. "Just remember to stand tall and be yourself. Everyone already loves you just as you are." In the next room, Charlotte was already out of bed and trying to reach her special dress that was hanging carefully in the wardrobe. Kate helped her daughter, and together they laid the beautiful outfit on the bed to make sure everything was perfect. The dress was a soft blue color with delicate embroidery that sparkled slightly in the morning light. Charlotte touched the fabric gently, as if it might disappear if she was not careful. "I love it so much, Mama," she whispered with wonder in her voice. "And you will look like a real princess in it," Kate replied, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. From Louis' room, they could hear giggling and the sound of something bouncing. Kate went to investigate and found her youngest son jumping on his bed with his teddy bear. When he saw his mother, he stopped and gave her his biggest smile. "Mama, is today the crown day?" he asked excitedly. "Yes, my little prince, today is the crown day," Kate laughed and scooped him up in her arms. Meanwhile, William was in his dressing room with his valet, going over the final details of his formal uniform. Every button had to be perfect, every medal in exactly the right place. He looked at himself in the mirror, and for a moment he saw his father at his own coronation years ago. The staff members were already busy throughout the castle. The head housekeeper was checking every room to make sure everything was spotless. The chef was preparing a light breakfast for the family, knowing they would need to eat something before the long day ahead. Back in their bedroom, Kate was looking through her jewelry box, deciding which pieces would go best with her outfit. She chose a simple but elegant necklace that had belonged to William's grandmother. As she put it on, she felt connected to all the royal women who had worn similar pieces to similar events over the centuries. The children's nanny arrived to help get Louis ready, while Kate and William finished their own preparations. The house was filled with a quiet energy as everyone prepared for what would be one of the most important days in recent royal history. William rejoined his family for breakfast. They sat together around the small table in their private dining room. The children chattered excitedly about the day ahead while their parents sipped their tea and tried to stay calm. George asked intelligent questions about the ceremony, while Charlotte wanted to know about all the pretty dresses she would see. Louis was more interested in whether there would be horses and soldiers with big hats. As they finished eating, Kate noticed that Charlotte had gotten a tiny spot of jam on her dress. For a moment, panic flashed across the little girl's face, but Kate quickly reassured her. "Do not worry, sweetheart," she said calmly. "We have a beautiful backup dress that is even prettier than this one." The morning sun was now fully shining through all the windows of the castle. Soon it would be time to leave for Westminster Abbey. William and Kate looked at each other across the breakfast table, both thinking the same thing. This day would change their family forever, and they were ready to face it together. After breakfast, the royal family moved to their dressing rooms to put on their special outfits for the coronation. Kate helped Charlotte into her backup dress, which was even more beautiful than the first one. The new dress had tiny pearls sewn into the fabric that caught the light perfectly. Charlotte looked at herself in the mirror and spun around, making the dress twirl. She felt like a princess from one of her favorite fairy tales. Her mother brushed her long brown hair and pinned it back with a small diamond clip that had belonged to the late queen. In his room, George was having trouble with his bow tie. William came to help his eldest son, and they stood together in front of the mirror. George looked so grown up in his formal suit that William felt a moment of sadness, thinking about how quickly his children were growing. "You look very handsome, my boy," William told him, adjusting the tie perfectly. "Thank you, Papa," George replied, trying to stand even taller. Down the hall, Louis was being helped by his nanny into his miniature formal outfit. He kept trying to put his jacket on backwards, which made everyone laugh. When he finally had everything on correctly, he marched around his room like a soldier, making everyone smile. Kate put on her elegant coat dress in a soft cream color. The dress had been specially made for this occasion, and it fit her perfectly. She added a matching hat with a small decorative feather and her pearl earrings. When she was finished getting ready, she looked in the mirror and took a deep breath. William appeared behind her in the mirror, wearing his full military uniform with all his medals and decorations. They looked at each other and both felt the weight of the day settling on their shoulders. "Are you ready for this?" he asked her quietly. "As ready as anyone can be," she replied with a small smile. The palace staff informed them that the cars would be ready in 10 minutes. This sent a wave of nervous energy through the family. Charlotte suddenly remembered something important and ran to her room to get her small white gloves. She had been practicing eating and waving with them on for weeks. George checked his appearance one more time and practiced his formal walk across his bedroom. He had been taught exactly how to walk with his shoulders back and his head held high. He wanted to make his family proud today. Louis found his favorite stuffed animal and asked if he could bring it with him. Kate gently explained that today was a very formal day, and it would be better to leave Teddy Bear safe at home. Louis understood and gave his bear a big hug goodbye. The head of security came to brief the family one final time about the schedule and the route they would take. He explained that there would be many photographers and television cameras filming their every move. The children listened carefully, even though they had heard this information many times before. Kate called her parents to let them know they were about to leave. Her mother wished them luck and told them how proud she was of the whole family. Her father reminded her to enjoy every moment because days like this were truly special. William received a text message from his father, who was already at Westminster Abbey preparing for the ceremony. The message simply said he was proud to have such a wonderful family and that he loved them all very much. William smiled and showed the message to Kate. As they prepared to leave their private rooms, the children gathered in the corridor with their parents. They looked like a picture-perfect royal family, all dressed in their finest clothes. Kate took a mental photograph of this moment, wanting to remember how they all looked before this historic day really began. The palace doors opened, and the morning air rushed in, bringing with it the distant sound of crowds cheering. Somewhere in London, millions of people were waiting to see them and celebrate this special day. George took his mother's hand while Charlotte held her father's. Louis walked between his parents, feeling very important and grown up. Together, the family walked towards the doors that would take them to their waiting cars and to one of the most important days of their lives. The staff members they passed along the way smiled and nodded respectfully. Some had been working at the palace for decades and had seen many important royal events, but they all knew that today was particularly special. The royal cars waited outside Windsor Castle, gleaming in the morning sunlight. Each vehicle had been polished until it shone like a mirror and decorated with small flags that fluttered gently in the breeze. The drivers stood at attention, wearing their best uniforms and white gloves. William and Kate walked out first, followed by their 3 children. The moment they appeared outside, photographers who had been waiting for hours began taking pictures. The children had seen cameras before, but never this many, all pointing at them at the same time. George remembered his lessons about posture and walked with his back straight and his head held high. He looked exactly like a young prince should look, confident and dignified. Charlotte walked beside her mother, holding her hand tightly and looking around with wide eyes at all the people and cameras. Louis bounced slightly as he walked, clearly excited by all the attention. When he saw all the shiny cars, his face lit up with delight. He had always loved cars, and these were the most beautiful ones he had ever seen. The family was helped into their car by palace staff members who made sure everyone was comfortable and secure. As soon as the doors closed, the noise from outside became much quieter. The children pressed their faces to the windows to wave at the people who had gathered to see them leave. The convoy of cars began to move slowly down the long driveway of Windsor Castle. Police motorcycles led the way with their lights flashing and sirens silent for now. Behind them came the royal cars, followed by more security vehicles. As they drove through the gates of the castle and onto the public roads, the scene changed dramatically. Thousands of people lined the streets holding flags and banners. Many had been waiting since very early in the morning just to catch a glimpse of the royal family. George looked out the window, amazed by how many people had come to see them. Some people were wearing costumes, others had painted their faces with the colors of the British flag. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving small flags excitedly. "Look, Mama," Charlotte said, pointing out the window. "There are so many people, and they are all smiling." Kate smiled back at her daughter. "They are all here to celebrate with us today," she explained. "They are happy because Grandpa is becoming king." Louis pressed his nose against the window, making it fog up slightly. He drew a small heart in the condensation with his finger, which made his parents laugh. Every time the car slowed down, he waved enthusiastically at the crowds. As they drove through the streets of London, the number of people seemed to grow larger and larger. Some had traveled from other countries just to be part of this historic day. They held signs saying, "Welcome King Charles," and "Long live the King." William pointed out famous landmarks to the children as they passed them. "There is Big Ben," he said as the famous clock tower came into view. "And look, there is the London Eye." The children had seen these places before, but never with so many people around them. The whole city seemed to be celebrating. Street vendors were selling Coronation souvenirs and television crews were set up on every corner. Charlotte noticed that many people in the crowd were wearing tiaras and crowns made of paper or plastic. Some children had drawn crowns on their foreheads with face paint. She thought this was wonderful and wished she could have a crown painted on her face too. The car moved through central London, passing shops and restaurants that were all decorated with flags and banners. Even the buses had special coronation decorations on them. The whole city looked like it was dressed up for a party. As they got closer to Westminster Abbey, the crowds became even thicker. Police officers formed lines to keep the pathways clear for the royal vehicles. Some people had been camping on the streets for days to get the best spots to see the coronation procession. Louis spotted a group of children about his own age waving from behind the barriers. He waved back enthusiastically, and they jumped up and down with excitement. It made him feel very important to know that other children wanted to see him. The ancient towers of Westminster Abbey appeared ahead of them, rising majestically above the surrounding buildings. Kate took a deep breath, knowing that in just a few minutes they would be walking into that historic building, where kings and queens have been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. William reached over and squeezed her hand. The children sensed the growing importance of the moment and became quieter, looking out at the magnificent building that would soon witness their grandfather's coronation. The royal cars slowed down as they approached Westminster Abbey. The ancient building stood before them like a giant stone guardian that had watched over England for hundreds of years. Its tall towers reached up toward the cloudy sky, and its massive wooden doors were decorated with beautiful flowers and golden ribbons. Crowds of people packed every available space around the abbey. They stood behind metal barriers that had been set up to keep the pathways clear. Police officers and security guards were everywhere, making sure everyone stayed safe. Television cameras on tall poles pointed toward the entrance, ready to capture every moment. The car carrying William, Kate, and their children came to a gentle stop right in front of the main entrance. Through the windows, they could see hundreds of photographers holding their cameras ready. The noise from the cheering crowd was so loud they could hear it clearly even inside the car. George looked out at all the people and felt his heart beating faster. He had practiced this moment many times, but actually being here was very different from practicing. He straightened his tie one last time and took a deep breath, just like his mother had taught him. Charlotte squeezed her mother's hand tightly. She could see children in the crowd who looked about her age, waving flags and smiling. Some were wearing dress-up crowns and pretending to be princesses just like her. This made her feel a little less nervous. Louis bounced in his seat, excited by all the colors and movement outside. He could see soldiers in red uniforms with big black hats standing very still like toy soldiers. He wanted to wave at them, but his father had explained that these soldiers were working and needed to stay focused. A palisade opened the car door and the sound from the crowd rushed in like a wave. William stepped out first, followed by Kate, who smoothed down her dress and adjusted her hat. The photographers immediately began taking pictures, their cameras clicking like hundreds of insects. William offered his arm to Kate, and together they moved toward the entrance of the abbey. George followed behind them, walking with careful, measured steps, just as he had been taught. He kept his eyes straight ahead, but he could feel thousands of people watching him. Charlotte came next, holding the hand of a palisade. She had never seen so many people looking at her at once, and for a moment she felt like hiding. But then she remembered what her mother had said about being brave, and she lifted her chin up and smiled. Louis walked between two palace staff members who were ready to help him if he needed it. He waved at the crowd with both hands, which made people cheer even louder. Some people called out his name, and he grinned widely, enjoying all the attention. The stone steps leading up to the abbey entrance seemed to go on forever. Each step brought them closer to the massive wooden doors that had welcomed kings and queens for centuries. Kate could feel her heart pounding, but she kept her face calm and dignified. George counted his steps quietly in his head, trying to stay focused. He could hear people in the crowd saying nice things about how grown-up he looked. This made him stand even taller and walk with more confidence. The red carpet under their feet was thick and soft. Flower petals had been scattered along the sides, and the sweet smell of roses filled the air. Palace guards in colorful uniforms lined the pathway, standing perfectly still despite all the excitement around them. As they reached the entrance to the abbey, Charlotte looked up at the enormous doors, decorated with gold and precious stones. She had never seen anything so beautiful and grand in her whole life. For a moment, she forgot about all the people watching and just stared in wonder. Louis tried to look at everything at once: the tall walls, the colorful banners, the people in funny hats. He whispered to his escort, asking questions about everything he saw. His curious nature made the serious adults around him smile. The family paused at the threshold of Westminster Abbey. Behind them, the crowd continued to cheer and wave flags. Ahead of them lay the magnificent interior where history would be made. William and Kate looked at each other, knowing that once they stepped inside, their lives would never be quite the same. The ancient doors opened slowly and cool air drifted out, carrying with it the scent of old stone and burning candles. The sound of organ music could be heard from within, soft and majestic. Together the family stepped forward, crossing from the bright sunlight into the sacred shadows of the abbey, ready to witness the coronation of their king. The inside of Westminster Abbey took their breath away completely. The ceiling stretched up so high it seemed to touch the clouds. Huge stone columns stood like ancient trees holding up the roof. Colored light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the old stone floor. Hundreds of people filled the wooden benches that had been arranged in perfect rows. World leaders, presidents, prime ministers, and members of royal families from many countries had come to witness this historic day. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, creating a sea of elegant colors and sparkling jewelry. George looked around with wide eyes at all the important people. He recognized some faces from television and history books. His lessons had taught him about many of these leaders, and now here they were sitting just a few rows away from him. Charlotte was amazed by how beautiful everything looked. Red and gold banners hung from the walls, and thousands of fresh flowers filled every corner with their sweet perfume. She had never imagined that a building could be so magnificent and grand. Louis swung his legs quietly as he sat between his parents. He was trying very hard to be good and sit still, but there was so much to see. Soldiers in bright red uniforms stood at attention around the edges of the abbey like colorful statues. Palace staff led the family to their special seats in the very front row. These seats had been specially decorated with soft cushions and small flowers. From here, they would have the perfect view of everything that was about to happen. Kate adjusted her dress and made sure the children were comfortable. She pointed out some of the beautiful decorations to Charlotte, who was still looking around in wonder. The little girl had never seen so many pretty things all in one place. The organ music that had been playing softly suddenly became louder and more grand. The sound filled every corner of the abbey, making the stone walls seem to vibrate. Even Louis stopped wiggling and listened to the magnificent music. More guests continued to arrive and find their seats. Bishops and religious leaders in special robes walked slowly down the center aisle. Their colorful clothes and tall hats made them look like characters from a fairy tale. George sat up very straight, remembering everything his tutors had taught him about proper behavior in important places. He watched as television cameras moved quietly around the edges of the abbey, capturing every detail for people watching at home around the world. The archbishop appeared wearing the most elaborate robes any of them had ever seen. His hat was decorated with gold and precious stones that caught the light from the windows. He carried a staff that was almost as tall as he was and looked very ancient and important. Charlotte whispered to her mother, asking about all the different people and things she could see. Kate answered her questions quietly, explaining who everyone was and what they were doing. This helped Charlotte feel less nervous and more excited about what was going to happen. The choir began to sing, adding their voices to the organ music. Their voices seemed to float up to the high ceiling and back down again, surrounding everyone with beautiful sounds. Louis listened with his mouth slightly open, amazed by how pretty the singing was. William felt the weight of history in this place. He knew that his own parents had been married here many years ago. His grandmother had been crowned queen in this very spot decades before he was born. Now his father would become king in the same place, continuing a tradition that was hundreds of years old. More music filled the air as everyone waited for the main ceremony to begin. The children could feel the excitement and importance in the air around them. Even though they were young, they understood that something very special was about to happen. Sunlight continued to stream through the stained glass windows, creating patterns that moved slowly across the floor as time passed. The smell of burning candles mixed with the perfume from hundreds of flowers, creating a scent that none of them would ever forget. Kate reached over and straightened Louis' tie while giving him an encouraging smile. She was so proud of how well all three children were behaving. They looked perfect sitting there in their fine clothes, surrounded by all the grandeur of Westminster Abbey. The moment everyone had been waiting for was about to begin. The coronation of their grandfather, their king, was just minutes away. The family sat together, feeling excited, nervous, and incredibly honored to be part of this historic day. The coronation ceremony began with a deep sound from ancient trumpets that echoed through every corner of Westminster Abbey. The music was so powerful that everyone could feel it vibrating in their chests. All the guests stood up at the same time, creating a rustling sound of silk and satin dresses. Then the most important moment arrived. The new king appeared at the entrance of the abbey wearing the most beautiful robes any of them had ever seen. The robe was made of purple velvet with gold thread woven through it in intricate patterns. It was so long that several people had to help carry the train behind him. George watched his grandfather walk slowly down the center aisle and felt his heart swell with pride. The man he knew as Grandpa, who told him stories and played games with him, was about to become the King of England. It was almost too amazing to believe. Charlotte gasped softly when she saw how magnificent her grandfather looked. His robe sparkled in the colored light from the windows, and he walked with such dignity that he seemed almost magical. She had seen him in fancy clothes before, but never anything like this. Louis pointed excitedly, but Kate gently lowered his hand while smiling at his enthusiasm. Even though he was only 5 years old, Louis seemed to understand that something very important was happening. He watched with wide eyes as his grandfather moved closer and closer to the front of the abbey. The archbishop stood waiting at the altar wearing robes almost as grand as the king's. In his hands he held the most famous crown in the world. Stedward's crown was made of solid gold and covered with precious stones that caught the light like tiny stars. William felt emotions he had never experienced before. His father was about to become king, which meant that William himself was now next in line to the throne. The weight of this responsibility felt both exciting and frightening at the same time. The ceremony included many ancient traditions that had been performed for hundreds of years. Religious leaders read from old books written in languages that sounded mysterious and important. The choir sang songs that had been sung at every coronation for centuries. George tried to follow along with everything that was happening. His tutors had explained the ceremony to him many times, but seeing it in person was completely different. Everything seemed more grand, more serious, and more magical than he had imagined. The most incredible moment came when the archbishop lifted the crown high above the king's head. The entire abbey became completely silent. Even the smallest children stopped making any noise. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Then slowly and carefully the archbishop placed Stedward's crown on the new king's head. The moment the crown touched his head, every person in the abbey shouted together, "God save the king." The sound was so loud and so joyful that it seemed to shake the ancient stones. Charlotte joined in with her clear, sweet voice, shouting the words along with everyone else. She felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, something that connected her to all the people who would come before and all who would come after. Louis clapped his hands excitedly, not fully understanding what had just happened, but knowing it was something wonderful. The happiness and celebration around him was infectious, and he bounced slightly in his seat with joy. Tears came to Kate's eyes as she watched her father-in-law officially become king. She thought about how much their lives would change from this day forward. But she also felt incredibly proud to be part of this historic moment. The trumpets sounded again, even louder than before. Church bells began ringing from towers all across London. The sound carried through the open doors of the abbey, mixing with the cheers of thousands of people waiting outside. William looked at his father and felt a mixture of pride, love, and amazement. The ceremony had transformed his father from simply being a prince into something much greater. He was now the king, and everything about their family had changed in that single moment. The newly crowned king looked out at his family and smiled. Despite all the grandeur and ceremony, he was still their father and grandfather. That had not changed and never would. The crown on his head was heavy with gold and jewels, but his love for his family was the heaviest and most precious thing he carried. The coronation ceremony came to an end with one final burst of magnificent music from the choir and organ. Everyone in Westminster Abbey stood up and began to applaud. The sound of hundreds of people clapping echoed off the ancient stone walls, creating a thunderous noise that seemed to go on forever. The newly crowned king walked back down the center aisle, but this time he was different. The crown on his head caught the light from every window and seemed to glow like it was made of captured sunlight. His purple robes flowed behind him as palace attendants carefully carried the long train. George, Charlotte, and Louis watched as their grandfather passed by their seats. He looked at them and gave them a special smile that was just for his family. Even though he was now officially the king, he was still their loving grandfather who cared about them more than anything. William and Kate gathered their children and prepared to leave the abbey. They had to follow a specific order with other members of the royal family. Palace staff guided them toward a side entrance where their cars would be waiting to take them back to Buckingham Palace. As they walked through the corridors of Westminster Abbey, George could hear the crowd outside cheering and singing. The noise was even louder than it had been when they arrived. More people had gathered during the ceremony, And now they were all celebrating the new king. Charlotte held her mother's hand tightly as they moved through the abbey. Her legs felt a little shaky from sitting still for so long, and her fancy shoes were starting to hurt her feet. But she was still excited about everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. Louis was getting tired, and William scooped him up to carry him. The little boy rested his head on his father's shoulder, but kept his eyes open because he did not want to miss anything. He could hear music and singing coming from outside, and it made him smile. When they stepped outside the abbey, the brightness of the afternoon sun made them all blink. The crowd had grown enormous while they were inside. People filled every street and square as far as they could see. Red, white, and blue flags waved everywhere like a sea of colors. The royal cars were waiting in a line, each one polished and decorated with small flags. Palace staff helped the family into their vehicle, making sure everyone was comfortable. The children pressed their faces to the windows, immediately wanting to see everything that was happening. The journey back to Buckingham Palace was completely different from their trip to the Abbey that morning. Now they were part of a grand procession with the newly crowned king and queen leading the way in the most magnificent carriage anyone had ever seen. Bands played music all along the route. Soldiers on horses rode alongside the carriages. People threw flower petals and confetti from windows above, creating colorful clouds that drifted down like snow. It was like being inside the most amazing parade in the world. George waved to the crowds from his window. Many people had signs with his name on them and pictures of the royal family. Some children his own age were dressed up like princes and princesses, clearly pretending to be him and his siblings. Charlotte was amazed by all the decorations that had appeared on the buildings while they were in the abbey. Banners and streamers hung from every window. Some buildings had giant pictures of the royal family hanging from their sides like enormous birthday cards. Louis bounced in his seat, pointing at everything he saw. There were people on stilts wearing costumes, people playing drums and trumpets, and even someone dressed up like a giant crown. He laughed and clapped his hands at all the wonderful sights. As they got closer to Buckingham Palace, Kate could see that the crowds were getting even thicker. The area in front of the palace was completely packed with people. She had never seen so many people in one place before, and it made her feel both excited and nervous. William looked out at all the happy faces lining the streets. These people had come from all over the world to celebrate this day. Some had traveled thousands of miles and waited for hours just to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Their joy and enthusiasm was infectious and made him feel proud to be part of something that brought so much happiness to so many people. The royal cars pulled through the gates of Buckingham Palace and into the courtyard. The massive palace looked even more grand than usual, with its windows sparkling in the afternoon sun and colorful flags flying from every pole. Palace staff were waiting to help the family out of their cars and escort them inside. William, Kate, and the children hurried through the corridors toward the famous balcony overlooking the mall. They could hear the roar of the enormous crowd gathered outside, even through the thick palace walls. The sound was like thunder that never stopped rolling across the sky. Charlotte changed out of her ceremony dress into a fresh outfit that was slightly more comfortable for standing and waving. She chose a pretty blue dress with white trim that matched the colors of the flags outside. Her mother helped her fix her hair, which had gotten a little messy during the car ride. George checked his appearance in a mirror and straightened his tie one final time. He knew that millions of people around the world would be watching when they stepped onto the balcony. He wanted to look perfect for this moment that would be photographed and remembered forever. Louis was given a quick snack and some water because palace staff knew that standing on the balcony could take a long time. He was getting more excited by the minute, asking everyone when they could go outside and see all the people who were waiting for them. Kate put on fresh lipstick and made sure her hat was sitting correctly. She could feel butterflies in her stomach, knowing that this balcony appearance would be seen by more people than had ever watched a royal event before. Television cameras from every country in the world were pointing at the palace. Through the windows they could see that the crowd stretched all the way down the mall and beyond. People covered every inch of available space. They sat on each other's shoulders, climbed lampposts, and hung from tree branches just to get a better view of the palace balcony. The newly crowned king and queen were already preparing for their appearance. Palace staff helped them arrange their robes and made sure the crown was sitting securely. This would be their first public appearance as the official king and queen of England. William gathered his family together, and they walked toward the balcony doors. Palace guards stood at attention on either side of the entrance wearing their most ceremonial uniforms. Everything had to be perfect for this historic moment. As they approached the doors, they could hear the crowd getting even louder. People were chanting, singing, and cheering, creating a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire palace. Charlotte grabbed her mother's hand, feeling nervous but excited at the same time. The heavy curtains that covered the balcony doors were pulled aside by palace staff. Bright sunlight flooded in along with the incredible noise from the crowd below. For a moment, the family just stood there taking in the magnitude of what they were about to do. The king and queen stepped out first onto the famous red-carpeted balcony. The moment they appeared, the crowd erupted with the loudest cheer any of them had ever heard. It sounded like 1,000,000 people all shouting with joy at exactly the same time. Then William and Kate walked out with their children following behind them. The noise somehow got even louder, if that was possible. People waved flags, threw their hats in the air, and called out the names of each family member. George stood beside his father and grandfather, looking out at the sea of faces below. He had never imagined that so many people could fit in one place. The crowd stretched as far as he could see in every direction, filling every street and square around the palace. Charlotte waved with both hands just like her mother had shown her. She could see children in the crowd waving back at her, some holding up signs with her name written in colorful letters. This made her smile so wide that her cheeks hurt. Louis jumped up and down with excitement, causing everyone on the balcony to laugh. He waved his arms in big circles and made funny faces that delighted the crowd below. His enthusiasm was impossible to resist, and even the most serious adults smiled when they saw him. Kate looked out at all the happy faces and felt overwhelmed by the love and support pouring up from the crowd. These people had come from all over the world to share in this special day, and their joy was infectious.